Hello, folks. Glad you're joining me here on this lovely Sunday afternoon. I am at my Brooklyn apartment. We are ready to have a lovely chat, a lot of things that we can discuss, many different issues on people's minds. I have got plenty, let me reemphasize, I have plenty of the diet beverage that shall not be named, and I'm going to take my first sip of it. Good stuff. Shout out to Ronnie Miller. Welcome, Ronnie. Glad you're joining us. I want to emphasize how much I value each of you who are watching this right now. You know, you don't have to be listening to me today. Shout out to Kami12AKK. You could be out in the park. You could be fishing. You could be hanging out with a few friends. You could be dancing at a discotheque. But instead, wherever you are, you're listening to me. And that's because you like me. And I like you too. And we're going to have a little bit of fun here today. But, as you know, the more the merrier. So, if you would like to take this opportunity to tweet this out, to put it on your social media, Caleb Maupin live, join the conversation. We're having a great time. You won't believe what he is saying. Oh my God, did you just hear what he said? He just said that. Oh my goodness. Gather round. Tweet this out. Make this a bigger conversation. We're having fun here today. Now, we got some very, very serious topics to discuss. A lot of serious things happening in the world. But at the same time, I pride myself in my ability to try and be the kind of person that laughs in the face of danger. To try to be the kind of person that keeps optimism in a world with so much pessimism and just you know, doom and gloom feelings. I try to keep my optimism going. There's a lot of sad things in this world. We all know it. But there's a reason that those of us who are interested in socialism and those who are interested in human progress and technology, there's a reason that we are attracted to that. Why? Because the world around us seems so dark, but we believe in hope, and we want things to get better. And you all are here, and you're not here to hear that the world is going to end because of climate change. You're not here to hear that there is no hope and that human civilization is at its end. You're not here to hear that the United States and the Western world and the entire world is on the brink of collapse. You're here to talk about the way out. And that, interestingly, was the Communist Party USA's presidential campaign slogan in 1940. The 1940 presidential campaign was the way out. And Earl Browder ran for president on a platform, and he wrote a book for his campaign called The Way Out. Interesting. And instead of focusing on the doom and gloom and how bad things are, because people know about that, people live it every day, I try to focus on what is good in the world. I try to give people hope to keep going. I try to not promote pessimism, whether it's right-wing pessimism or left-wing pessimism. I try to promote tech optimism. I try to give people a reason to keep going. I try to give people encouragement, give people a reason to become involved in politics and to take action. I try to be optimistic. Optimism is important, and optimism is something that is underestimated. You know, we tell young people to keep their head up high, have a good attitude about life. Well, the reason for that is not simply because it makes things easier for their parents or their caregivers. It's because it makes it easier for them. If you can learn to see the good in the world, you can learn to see the glass as being half full rather than half empty, you'll live a happier life. And if you're somebody who really knows about the horrors in the world, that can be difficult at times. And it can be especially important for you to learn to be optimistic. So we want to be optimistic. We want to look toward the future. We want to be happy. Shout out to Travis Smith. Shout out to Lisa Hauserman. Shout out to Kinky. Shout out to all of you who are joining us. Shout out to Eve out in Denver. Shout out to all kinds of folks. We are going to have a good conversation here. I love all of you deeply, and we are going to have a good afternoon chat. We're going to talk about some rather serious things, though. It's not going to be the you know, all fun and games and dandy, but that's okay, because we're all adults here, I hope. I mean, I guess you could be younger, and there's nothing going to be inappropriate here. Shout out to Joe and Miriam. And you know, we're just going to have a conversation here. Shout out to Kayuza. Shout out to Lisa. Shout out to Cami. Shout out to JT24. A lot of people joining this conversation because we have a lot to say, right? I'm glad you're here, right? I'm glad you're here. A lot of things on our minds, so I'm going to take another swig of that diet beverage that will not be named. No product placement here. Shout out to Georgie Boy. So, we're all aware of that horrendous shooting in Christchurch, New Zealand. We're all aware of it. How could you not be aware of it? And so, as a special friend of the show requested, perhaps it is best that we have a moment of silence to commemorate the victims of this horrendous incident. So we will have a moment of silence to mourn the loss of these individuals who were ruthlessly killed while attending their place of worship in Christchurch, New Zealand, another horrendous mass shooting. So just a moment of silence. Right? Tragic. Horrendous. There's no way anyone can look at that, anyone with a rational mind, and think that what that shooter did made any moral or ethical sense. Killing a group of people simply as they were going out to practice their religion and pray. Just a horrendous, horrendous incident. A lot that I can say about it. But, I'm going to attack this on a number of levels, because I feel like there's a couple of things that are missing. First point, right, is, when we talk about Islamophobia, right, the idea that Muslims are bad people, Islam is evil, it's coming to get us and kill us all. Folks, we've all met them. We've all met them, okay? I've met them. I'm in New York City, which is a pretty liberal place. I've met them. If you live in the United States, you've met them also. The conversation with them always begins with, I actually read the Quran. I read the Quran, I'm an expert on Islam because I read the Quran, or at least selections of it, in this Islamophobic book I bought. I'm an expert on Islam, and Islam is dangerous. They're bad. They're bad. I used to work at an insurance firm, right? And I remember when I worked at the insurance firm, one of my coworkers, he was an Orthodox Jew, and he was a very, very hating Muslims kind of person. He did not like Muslims. And I would have this argument with him a lot. And I remember, I would sit there with my coworker, and he would say to me, I've read the Quran, okay? I know. I've read the Quran. I know exactly. Every Muslim is a terrorist. It's in the Quran. I've read it. I've read it. And I would say to him, okay, now you're an Orthodox Jew. Now, there are other Jews that are Hasidic Jews, right? Now, has it occurred to you that you interpret the Torah one way, and they interpret it differently? There are also Reform Jews. There are also conservative Jews. All of you read the same Torah, but you interpret it differently, right? There are different branches of Judaism. Not all of you interpret the same way. Yeah, but no, they're all fake. I'm a real practicing Jew. I practice the Torah the right way, and any Muslim who practices Islam the right way is a terrorist. And I would say to them, okay. I would say to them, look, right? In the Bible, for example, it says that, women should not speak in the church. In a church building, women should not speak. But every Christian denomination I know of allows women to open their mouths inside of church buildings. And it's this weird kind of Islamophobia, and it's a very simplistic way of thinking. You talk to them, and it's like, so these people, you think maybe they've never met a Muslim in their whole life. But it's, as far as they're concerned, every Muslim thinks exactly the same way. And then they've got this logical fallacy that they do, right? So any Muslim who comes out and condemns terrorism or doesn't engage in this kind of activity, they say, well, they're just practicing taqiyya. And they point to, they've got a verse that they selected that says you're allowed to lie. So therefore, all Muslims who don't practice terrorism are practicing taqiyya. They're just lying for the faith. It's really crazy. The Islamic faith has a very beautiful history. You can read about the polemics between the Sunni and the Shia, where the Sunni are saying that God defines justice, and the Shia are saying that justice defines God. You can read the developments and about the martyrdom of Imam Hussein and Imam Ali, there's a beautiful history with Islam. Islam is a very rich tradition. You talk about the Islamic awakening or the Islamic Enlightenment. that happened, before the Renaissance in Europe, where in the Islamic world, in the Middle East, they were doing huge breakthroughs in science and astronomy and mathematics, and they were just doing amazing, amazing things. And that the Islamic world, the Islamic tradition is very, very rich. But there's this crowd of people that just have so fixated on hating Islam. It's like Islam is the enemy as far as they're concerned. All Islam is the same. All Muslims are the same, and they're all... and it's really silly. I am no fan of Hillary Clinton at all, right? I am no fan of her, and you talk to these people, and like one of their favorite things is they'll talk about Huma Abedi, right? She's one of Hillary Clinton's aides, was married to Anthony Weiner here, New York, tied to Hillary Clinton. And they'll say, oh, she lived in Saudi Arabia for many years, so she must be a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. Well, there's a lot of things wrong with that statement. The first of which being that the Muslim Brotherhood is actually illegal in Saudi Arabia. The Saudis are Wahhabis. The Muslim Brotherhood are a totally different thing, right? Wahhabism, the belief that you should have an absolute monarchy, that you should live as if it's the 1400s. That interpretation that they have in Saudi Arabia, where until recently women weren't allowed to drive cars, that particular interpretation of the Islamic faith and the Muslim Brotherhood interpretation of the Islamic faith are completely different. Now, the USA and the U.S. government has a long history of supporting both Wahhabis and the Muslim Brotherhood, and of course these raving Islamophobes never talk about it, or if they do, they get it completely wrong. But there you go, right? So you got Wahhabis. That's the belief that you need an absolute monarchy, that you should have, you should try to maintain a semi-feudal economic and political structure, right? The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the government, the monarchy basically owns everything. Everyone is a subject, not a citizen. They are the property of the king. They're not citizens of Saudi Arabia. It's a very medieval, archaic political system. However, the Muslim Brotherhood, that's different. The Muslim Brotherhood started in the 1920s, and it was in Egypt, as there were calls in the Middle East for westernization, modernization. The Muslim Brotherhood was conservative small business owners. And they were not opposed to free elections, but they hated communism. With a passion, they hated communism, and they hated Arab nationalism. And then during the 1950s, the U.S. CIA saw them as useful. And basically, the Muslim Brotherhood, unlike the Wahhabis, the Muslim Brotherhood does not advocate a Wahhabi political system. The Muslim Brotherhood, they basically say that capitalism is great. You need free market capitalism as long as everyone is a good Muslim. As long as you give your zakat, you're paying your charity, capitalism's fine, free markets and all of that, as long as everyone is a good Muslim and has a good moral code. The free market is great, and we need to maintain our traditional ways. And those Westerners, they are socially liberal and dangerous, and the communists and the Arab nationalists, they believe in science and advancing, and they're no good. And it's the small business owners pushing kind of keep the government out and maintain kind of a moral, religious way of being. That's the Muslim Brotherhood, and the U.S. intelligence agencies supported them to bring down and work against Arab nationalism, first in Egypt and elsewhere throughout the Middle East. We know Abdel Nasser, the socialist leader of Egypt, when he was elected, he started building infrastructure. He built this beautiful facility, the Aswan Dam, a huge hydroelectrical power plant, the biggest hydroelectrical power plant in the Middle East. He aligned with the Soviet Union. He did a lot to raise people in Egypt out of poverty. And the Muslim Brotherhood didn't like him because he's a commie, he's a Marxist. He's an Arab nationalist. They didn't like him. So the CIA supported them and gave them weapons and support to try and bring down Abdel Nasser, right? The Muslim Brotherhood has been supported by the West against Bashar Assad in Syria and against the Iraqi government of Saddam Hussein. This feeling that Arab nationalism is the enemy, and that we just need free market capitalism as long as everyone is a good Muslim, and we're just going to set up these charity programs, and that belief system. That's the Muslim Brotherhood. It's bad, it's reactionary, but it's not just the Wahhabis, right? The Wahhabis are also bad and reactionary, but they advocate, a straight up autocratic monarchy and the political systems that existed around the 1400s, and that's a completely different system. Now, the United States government, and this is what people don't get, is the U.S. government has a long history of supporting both Wahhabis and the Muslim Brotherhood. And interestingly, I don't know if anyone here watches Morning Joe. Does anyone here watch Morning Joe on MSNBC? Well, who is with Joe, right? You got Joe, but who is with Joe Scarborough? Mika Brzezinski. Mika Brzezinski. And who is Mika Brzezinski's father? That would be none other than Zbigniew Brzezinski, the Polish-born advisor to, at first, the Carter administration and the Reagan administration, national security advisor, CIA man, Mr. Intelligence, Zbigniew Brzezinski probably did more than any other American to bring about the creation of Al-Qaeda and to further Wahhabism around the world. In the late 1970s, Brzezinski had the brilliant idea of finding this young Saudi billionaire who was the heir to the state monopoly on construction in Saudi Arabia, this young Saudi billionaire named Osama bin Laden, and recruiting Osama bin Laden to wage a jihadist army and build a Wahhabi extremist religious army to attack and fight against the Soviet Union and the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan that emerged in 1978. In Afghanistan, in 1978, you had the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan come into existence. They started just some basic stuff, like, replanting the forests that the British had just, plundered and cut down, literacy programs. They were not even at the point of trying to have even socialism there. They were just trying to have, on some level, some basic development, a Democratic Republic of Afghanistan. And Brzezinski recruits this young guy named Osama bin Laden to build a Wahhabi army to foment, basically an Islamist civil war against the Soviet Union and against the Democratic Republic in Afghanistan. And that's the roots of what is now Al-Qaeda. It is essentially Brzezinski and the CIA working with Osama bin Laden to fight against socialism, Marxism, and the Soviet Union, right? Zbigniew Brzezinski, right? And now his daughter is a TV star in the United States, right? Nobody ever talks about that. I talk about it, right? And that's kind of the roots of the Wahhabism, right? Muslim Brotherhood was this kind of weird cult in Egypt, this small business owner, middle class, conservative religious movement that was fighting against the Egyptian socialist Abdel Nasser. CIA started supporting them in the 50s. And Wahhabism, that's the ideology of Saudi Arabia, which existed in Saudi Arabia and not many other places, until the CIA saw that it was an effective battering ram against communism and Arab nationalism, and they also started funding them. So now, these two wings of what people like to refer to as quote-unquote radical Islam or Islamism or jihadism, whatever you want to call it, both of them are basically entities that existed in the Middle East that U.S. foreign policy saw as useful to fight against Arab nationalism, which was secular, and Ba'athist Arab socialism, and communism in the Middle East, right? And that's basically the roots of this kind of stuff. Now, those people who sit there and go, I read the Quran. Every Muslim is a member of Al-Qaeda. It's in the Quran. I read it. I read this book I bought on Fox News. They were advertising it, and I read it. They don't know what they're talking about. And it's easy. And I will say this. It is easy to hate. Right? It's easy to look at the problems in the world today, to see the widespread terrorism and the problems that exist, and just say, you know what? Islam's an evil religion. I don't know any Muslims, so therefore that's easy for me to say. I don't have to dislike anyone I used to like. I don't know anybody, so therefore I can just hate. It's easy. I can just hate. Easy. Yep, I hate. That's an easy way out. And you talk to these people, and it's like their mind is not working properly. I'm a Christian. I talk about that. I talk about, the teachings of Jesus Christ being very, very important to my belief system. But I'll tell you, there are some awful things in the Bible. Numbers chapter 31. Read Numbers chapter 31 from the Christian Bible. That is a verse in the Bible that basically advocates genocide. Read it. I'm not going to recite it to you today. Read Numbers chapter 31. I don't know any Christian in their right mind that would support the kind of activity that is in Numbers chapter 31. You know what? And that doesn't mean I'm just a Christian who's practicing taqiyya. Yeah, he's saying that on YouTube, but Caleb's practicing taqiyya. He really believes that because all Christians believe everything in the Bible. Come on, folks. All Christians interpret everything in the Bible exactly the same way. Oh, God. This Islamophobia stuff, it's very, very easy. It's people that are taking the psychologically easy way out. If they can just demonize an entire faith, right? Meditating Jesus says, Caleb practicing taqiyya, confirmed. Well, there you go, right? If people can just take the easy way out and hate right? An entire religion, and say that's the problem. They don't have to ask themselves what's going on in U.S. foreign policy. They don't have to ask themselves about the fact that, hey, you know, during the War on Terror, we invaded Iraq, and the terrorists got stronger there, and ISIS emerged. In the War on Terror, you know, we overthrew Libya, and the ISIS and the terrorists got stronger there. And this War on Terror, we're not actually fighting the terrorists. We're fighting the enemies of the terrorists. We're fighting the Arab nationalists and the secularists, you know, in Syria, right? I mean, we're trying to overthrow the guy who is fighting against Al-Qaeda. You know, there's never any acknowledgement of this. It's easy to just say, what, Muslims are no good. They're bad folks, and yeah, that's how it is. It's just that simple. It's an easy way out. It is an easy way out. You don't have to talk about Brzezinski. You don't have to talk about U.S. foreign policy. You don't have to talk about what's been going on in that region. You don't have to talk about the fact that we're stuck on fossil fuels. We have a fossil fuel-centered world economy. So that makes that region, you know, something that people are going to fight over as the Wall Street and London scramble to maintain their profits and control the global economy. You don't have to talk about any of that. You can just go, well, there's a religion out there and it's evil. Easy. It's psychologically simple. And that said, I must tell you all that you know, and shout out to those of you who are joining us. Shout out to Jason Dunn. Shout out to Zanctus. But, you know, I must tell you all, the response of the right wing in the United States to this horrendous incident is just downright despicable. I'm not talking about the far right wing. I'm talking about the mainstream right wing. So, first of all, you have a tweet, and I think he deleted it. I'm not sure of that. But I've been seeing it as a photo going around the internet, because I think he took it down after he realized what he had said. But Dinesh D'Souza tweeted out, I've seen the screenshot, that, you know, the only reason the media is covering this is because it was done to Muslims. But the media never covers terrorist attacks by Muslims. Right? Really. Dinesh D'Souza lives in this alternate universe where terrorist attacks committed by people claiming the Islamic faith, calling themselves Muslims while they commit them, are never covered by American media. That's what Dinesh D'Souza tweeted out. That's what he believes. Never. Never. I mean, the Pulse nightclub shooting, you know, the guy was called a Muslim, but they didn't cover it, I guess. There was no coverage. You know, I mean, what world are these people living in, right? Dinesh D'Souza, I mean, he also thinks that Abraham Lincoln was a big right-wing conservative and the Ku Klux Klan are a bunch of lefties and socialists. So, you know, I mean, what the man says is not exactly, you know, credible. Man, you know, it's basically a historical revisionist, but now he's revising history as it happens. Apparently, according to Dinesh D'Souza, the media never covers terrorist attacks by people claiming to be Muslims. Never does it. It only covers this attack in New Zealand because it was done to Muslims, because they were the victims, right? That's Dinesh D'Souza's worldview. And blast from the past, I hadn't even heard his name in a long time, right? But you guys remember Rush Limbaugh. Rush Limbaugh. I hadn't even heard his name. I didn't even know he was still on the radio, right? Rush Limbaugh. Now, you know, when I was growing up in Ohio, a lot of the men in my town, middle-aged guys, they loved Rush Limbaugh. Rush Limbaugh was the voice on the radio while they were working at the construction firm or doing carpentry or working in their factory or driving around and delivering stuff. And he was the voice on the radio telling it like it is. Rush Limbaugh. Rush. You know, and they loved their afternoon with Rush Limbaugh, the 3 hours of, you know, Rush Limbaugh on the radio. I didn't even know he was still around. Regardless, apparently Rush Limbaugh, from what I'm seeing, Rush Limbaugh said that, how do we know that this attack wasn't done by a liberal trying to frame conservatives? Now, isn't that interesting? You know, I remember Rush Limbaugh. You know, you think about that for a minute. How do we know? How do we know I'm Rush Limbaugh? How do we know that? Well, think about it, right? Rush Limbaugh is trying to sound like Alex Jones, right? Alex Jones, you know, he's been saying false flag for years. That's been like, you know, the favorite talking point of, you know, Alex Jones. Every time there's a big event, you know, false flag, you know, and 9/11 truth and people having their questions about the mainstream media and all that. But Rush Limbaugh, he was just the biggest defender of the establishment. But now, it seems like Alex Jones-type thinking is much more prevalent among the right wing. And so he's sitting there trying to catch up, almost. And so how do we know it wasn't a liberal that did this? It was a false flag attack in order to frame conservatives. You know, I mean, there you go. I mean, I hadn't even heard the name Rush Limbaugh. I think the last time I heard the name Rush Limbaugh was back in 2011, in late 2011, when he came and spoke in New York City, and there were protests against it. And I went to those protests as a young activist. And I remember Rush Limbaugh was there, and people brought up some of his ugly past when people died of HIV. He would, and AIDS, he would read their names with applause, like he was happy that they were dead. Not a particularly nice guy. I did note that apparently Rush Limbaugh, his background, his family is from a part of Missouri called Little Dixie, which interestingly enough, my father's family is also from that area. It's a part of Missouri that is like the South and has a history of aligning with the Confederacy, and that's Rush Limbaugh's heritage. So that's kind of interesting. But regardless, I didn't even know Rush Limbaugh was still around, right? I remember Rush Limbaugh when he was a big deal, but Rush Limbaugh, he thinks it might be a false flag. How do we know it wasn't a liberal that did this? Trying to hurt Donald Trump's image by killing a bunch of Muslims. It was the liberals. I mean, that's Rush Limbaugh. Oh boy. So much going on in the world. I'm trying to be jovial here. I'm trying to talk about the horrendous shooting that happened because, it's heartbreaking. You hear about these horrendous events, and there's a lot of people pointing out this shooter was a quote-unquote white nationalist. And I don't know how to say this, without being crass. I mean, I'm not worried about offending white nationalists. White nationalism is the stupidest concept I've ever heard, right? White nationalism. What is a nation? Okay, so a nation is a people with a common culture, common language, common heritage, common territory. White people in the United States are not a nation by any stretch, right? How in the world can you say that there is a white nation in the United States, right? I mean, how in the world can you say that, that rural farmers in Kansas are the same nationality as, Serbian and Slovenian folks on the west side of Cleveland, right? Do they have a common background? No. Do they have a common language? No. Do they have a common economy and a common territory? No. I mean, how can you say that white Jewish people in Crown Heights are the same nationality as say people of Scotch-Irish ancestry in the South? They're not. There is no white nation. The concept that white Americans are a nation is absurd, right? I remember when I was sitting in a restaurant in Hamtramck in Detroit, and I remember sitting there, and this was an example of when I really started to understand things about race in the United States a little more than I had before. I was sitting in a restaurant in Hamtramck, which is like this Polish, suburb or city within a city kind of in Detroit. And it's, a lot of Polish folks. I'm in this restaurant, and there's a woman, she's serving me, and she's from Poland. Not speaking English very clearly, speaks Polish as her primary language. I'm in the restaurant, and it's the middle of the day. I got a book, I'm reading it, I'm waiting to do something, or I'm just killing time, basically, in Detroit. This is, maybe 10 years ago. So I'm sitting in Detroit. It was when I was there on a summer internship. And I remember, this Polish waitress comes over, she gives me the menu. And on the menu, it has the drinks, and even back then, I was an addict to that diet soda that will not be named. So I ordered my soda, and I noticed that on the menu, it said no refills. No refills, which, is pretty standard. They refill your soda. I said, oh, it's too bad you don't have refills. And she says to me, in broken English, because she's, first born in Poland, and not English is not her first language, she says to me, we have them for you. And I thought, we have them for you? What does she mean? And then she motions over to the other side of the restaurant where there's an African-American person. And she's basically saying to me, yeah, we have no refills on there because we don't like having black people in this restaurant. She was being racist, right? But you look at that incident. What do I have in common with this Polish-born, Polish-speaking waitress in Hamtramck? I'm from Ohio. I'm from a rural town in Ohio. I grew up as a Protestant. English was my first language. She is from Poland. She's living in an urban area in Detroit. She's Roman Catholic, and her first language is Polish. How in the world are we the same nation, right? These white nationalists would have you believe that was an act of solidarity between two white brothers, two white comrades. What? No, I have nothing in common with her. I am not the same nation. There is no white nation. White nationalism is the rebranding, right? The people who believe in that tend to be people who like Adolf Hitler. They tend to be, Holocaust deniers. It's that whole world, right? It's the Richard Spencer, alt-right, white identity, whatever. But they call themselves white nationalists. And, white nationalist is an oxymoron, right? There is no white nation. There is no white nationality. right? There are nations of people who are ethnically white, but that, I mean, you know, the concept of white nationalism in the United States is the dumbest thing I have ever heard. Now, black nationalism makes sense, right? The descendants of African slaves tend to live in the same areas. They tend to have a common dialect. They tend to have the same religious groupings. They tend to be, you know, shop at the same stores, you know, the same neighborhoods. You know, there's whole regions of the South that are majority African-American, descendants of African slaves. Black nationalism, you can make a case for. But white nationalism is the stupidest thing I have ever heard. This idea that there is some kind of white nation within the United States that wants to declare its independence and is fighting for its self-determination is completely idiotic, right? That Appalachian white people, what do they have to do with white people in New England? What do Appalachian white people have to do with white people in Nevada? What do white people in Nevada have to do with white people in Alabama? What do Catholic white people have to do with Protestant white people? What do atheist secular white people have to do with fundamentalist evangelical white people? There is no white nation. The concept of a white nation, it's like anyone who knows anything about nationalism, whether you study Lenin or the Marxist tradition, or whether you study like Max Weber and the old, the academic sociological tradition, there is no such thing as white nationalism. White nationalism is the stupidest thing I have ever heard of, and it's a cover. We all know what white nationalists are. They're Nazis, right? It's the Hitler fan club. That's what it is, right? I mean, who is the most prominent white nationalist in the United States? We all know who that is. Former Congressman David Duke. And we all know what David Duke is all about. So white nationalism, no. You know what I mean? No. Just forget it, right? And to even utter the phrase white nationalist, to even utter that phrase, you have to you have to be blatheringly ignorant about the entire history of the country, the concept of what nationalism even means. White nationalism is an oxymoron. It is the dumbest thing. I mean, the only thing that white Americans have in common is not being black or brown. That's it. That's it, right? We don't have a common economy. We don't have a common territory. We don't have a common religion. We don't have a common culture. We don't have a common language even. We have different languages among white Americans, right? There is nothing that ties white Americans to each other. There is no national bond among white Americans. So white nationalism is dumb. And I will say that, and I will continue to say that, because I'm being intellectually honest. I'm not pandering here, right? If I was simply pandering, I would talk differently. I'm just being intellectually honest and saying that white nationalism is idiotic, right? And I'm offending people, and do I care if I offend white nationalists? Not really. Not really. But anyway, oh boy, what else is going on in our world today? One thing that I think is interesting is, these mass shootings, that seems to be the insanity of our time. Right? Mass shootings, I remember late 90s, in the lead up to the Columbine massacre, there were some school shootings, students shooting their teachers, shooting up the cafeteria. Then you had the Columbine massacre of 1999. And then, mass shooters kind of became what you might call it's kind of the crime of our time, you could say, right? That is the ugly, murderous insanity of our age. But one kind of ugly, murderous insanity that we don't see very much of anymore is serial killers. And that used to be very common. 70s, 80s, but even going back like Jack the Ripper. It used to be very common that you would have these men who would hire prostitutes or track down women who were alone someplace in a dark street and murder them and cut them up in kind of a sexualized way, right? The famous Jack the Ripper case. I know they had a guy like Bible John who was in Scotland, and you started having these serial killers, right? And they would commit kind of sexualized murders of women. They tended to be men, and you had weird cases like Jeffrey Dahmer where they were killing young men, but it was serial killers. That was a thing. We don't have that anymore. I mean, we do. I mean, it happens every so often, but it used to be really, really common. And if you look at crime statistics, one of the things, and people never report on, like, positive news about crime, right? Serial killers, we don't have them, right? It just, it happens every so often. It's not completely unheard of. But it used to be a really, really common form of criminality, is these serial killers. Now we don't have that. But mass shootings we used to not have either. Now we have mass shooters, right? But what the mass shooters are doing is not overtly sexual, right? I mean, they're not, it's not a sexual thing. It's almost like, they throw politics in there. They tend to have wacky, inconsistent, conspiracy theories and big manifestos to justify what they do, but there's nothing sexual about it. But this old kind of killing, tended to be done by young white men also, was this serial killer stuff. That doesn't seem to happen anymore. And it's interesting, because, so what happened? I hope you folks couldn't see me. Am I back? Are you all seeing me? Am I alive? I'm seeing Where Are You from Kinky. Well, I'm right here. Thanks, Caleb. Capitalism for the Poor Technology. Right, exactly. I need to get a Huawei phone. Why is the U.S. government trying to stop me from getting a better phone that doesn't interrupt my lives? Seriously. I mean, I need myself a nice, Chinese-made, battery-lasting, better camera phone from China without these problems. Caleb, why did Stalin deport the Chechens? Caleb, Kinky says, you're back. I'm glad to be back. What is it with this technology? I was talking about how we don't have serial killers anymore. I was talking about how Jack the Ripper, the famous case, and I believe it was 1888, you had Jack the Ripper, and how that was the first serial killer case, and now we don't have them anymore, and what's that about? And yes, welcome back. I don't know what's going on here. My phone's acting weird, and the world is frustrating. A lot on people's minds. Perhaps the Silicon Valley overlords, the elite rulers of the cyber world decided they didn't like what I was saying. I was getting on their nerves, perhaps. I doubt it. But whatever, technical difficulties. Maybe they should make better phones. Maybe they should allow me to get the P20 Pro. Ms. Stolanovich says CIA was disrupting the Maupin hour. Yes, exactly. Blame it on the Illuminati. Who knows, right? I think it's just the poor quality of my cell phone. Ronnie Miller is asking me, what about Abraham Lincoln as a symbol for American socialists? Well, Lincoln was not a socialist, but he did support organized labor, Ronnie, and that's important. And on top of that, Lincoln, in a lot of ways, he was very, very progressive. Now, unfortunately, the time that he was living in, at one point he pandered to racists. There's a rant that Lincoln gave where he says, basically, don't worry, I don't believe in racial equality. He was opposed to slavery. And, W.E.B. Du Bois wrote a very good history of the Civil War, Black Reconstruction, and it's a very good study. And he argues that Abraham Lincoln, his views changed and evolved over the course of the Civil War. And that's the argument. And, I think that Abraham Lincoln is a very, very important figure in our history. I obviously don't endorse a lot of what he said, but in terms of revolutionaries in American history, Abraham Lincoln led the most radical revolution that we've ever had. He overturned an entire economic system, the slave system, and he overthrew it. And he built a broad coalition that included Marxists like August Willich and Joseph Wedemeyer, and a whole communist fighting force called the Ohio 9th Regiment. Google them. The Ohio 9th Regiment during the Civil War, they waved the red flag. There was a communist fighting force. He organized, the first woman to ever lead soldiers into battle, the first woman, Harriet Tubman, and she led armed guerrilla warfare along the Combahee River in South Carolina. He had support from labor unionists and radical abolitionists. They were singing John Brown's body is a strolling in the great, and they had to write the Battle Hymn of the Republic because they didn't want people to invoke the memory of this armed radical revolutionary John Brown. Yes, the Second American Revolution, the U.S. Civil War, was one of the most progressive and glorious moments in our history when there is a broad coalition of people. The African slave resistance forces like Harriet Tubman, and Frederick Douglass, Marxists, abolitionists, religious folks who were opposed to slavery, northern industrial capitalists who thought the slave system was getting in their way and was cutting into their profits. It was a broad coalition to destroy an old economic system. And if you just want to write that off, right, which is very adolescent, right, it's like, well, they did something I don't like, so I'm not going to read about it, I'm not going to pay any attention to it, it's not romantic. Then you do that. You can do that. I'm not going to stop you. That's your right. But I think anyone who is seriously considering themselves to be progressive in the United States of America should be very interested in the Civil War and what Lincoln represented, which was the advance of history, right? Lincoln as a symbol for socialists. I think that American socialists should find what was good about Abraham Lincoln and try to replicate it. And what was bad about him, they should be critical of and acknowledge. But I think the legacy of Lincoln and the legacy of the Second American Revolution, in which a broad coalition of people from many different strata of U.S. society came together to shut down an immoral, outmoded economic order, I think that was a good thing. I really do. I really do. So what else is new, folks? Now, I see people are asking me questions about China, and I see that people are asking me about Richard Wolff. They're asking me a bunch of different things, but I wanted to go over, you know, and this will all relate, but I wanted to go over basically, you know, what's going on with North Korea now. Now, there have been 2 summits so far. You had the Hanoi summit that just happened. It was kind of a total flop. They didn't even finish lunch. And then you have also the, you know, before that you had the first one, the historic first Singapore summit, where Trump and Kim shook hands in Singapore. But in the aftermath of the flopped Hanoi summit, you know, we see basically kind of a gangster attack on the North Korean embassy in Spain. Right? The North Korean embassy in Spain, you know, people go in, they tie up, they steal a bunch of computers, and the press in Spain is saying a lot of these people are linked to the CIA. And we had kind of a gangster attack on the North Korean embassy in Spain, right? And there's talk of the suspension of the North Korea-U.S. nuclear talks, right? And what's interesting about that is that it's pretty clear, it's blatantly obvious, and I wrote an article on this, so if you check out my blog, The Octant, or if you get my newsletter, you'll probably get another one in a couple days, that there is a division, a big division among the rich in the United States when it comes to China, and when it comes most especially to North Korea. But China's part of it too. So one of the biggest supporters of you know, the talks between Trump and Kim. I mean, he was vocal. He appeared on television talking about it. He lives in Singapore, is the American-born billionaire investor by the name of Jim Rogers, right? Jim Rogers, he's American-born, but he lives in Singapore. His daughter is learning to speak Mandarin. He's very, very wealthy, and he is excited about doing business in North Korea. Watch some of what he said. He is thrilled. He wants to invest in North Korea. And you'll notice this American billionaire, and who actually, I guess, says that he's very close to Austrian school thinking. He's a libertarian, right? He's Ludwig von Mises fan. But he says that he's excited to do business in North Korea because one thing that the North Korean government has done is provided the population high level of education, right? There is no illiteracy in North Korea, right? They've wiped it out. The population of North Korea, they've got a lot of engineers, they've got a lot of scientists, got a lot of brilliant mathematicians, and he's excited. And he's been saying on South Korean television and on Fox News and other places that he wants there to be opening of economic, you know, relations. He wants to invest in North Korea. He is a billionaire in America, of American-born. He actually now lives in Singapore. He wants to invest in North Korea. He's excited. But who isn't? Well, I bet you didn't know this, but back in the 1970s, as Jim Rogers was just starting his career as a billionaire investor, he was working with another billionaire investor by the name of George Soros. And George Soros does not want there to be a restoration of relations between the USA and North Korea. Very interesting. George Soros seems to be quite opposed to the rapprochement, right? Whereas Jim Rogers, you know, the two of them apparently had some kind of falling out. If you read, Jim Rogers is rather diplomatic about it. He doesn't say exactly what their disagreement was about. They no longer work together. Haven't worked together in years. They don't talk to each other. They don't even speak. So Jim Rogers, one billionaire, right? One billionaire by the name of Jim Rogers, with Rogers and Beeland, you know, Incorporated or something like that. Jim Rogers and a lot of, you know, certain number of investors and capitalists in the USA want to invest, whereas George Soros does not. And it's interesting because one of the arguments that Jim Rogers makes for his investing is he says, look, this is the Deng Xiaoping moment for North Korea, right? Kim Jong-un wants to be the Deng Xiaoping. He wants to open up. He wants to have a market sector in the economy of North Korea, and that'll be great. We'll make a lot of money. It'll be great. And let's be real. North Korea, not only do they have a highly educated workforce, a lot of engineers, a lot of scientists, no illiteracy, very highly educated population. On top of that, it's the mountainous part of Korea, right? The Korean Peninsula, they're the northern part, and it's the mountainous part. And those mountains, they don't just have a lot of coal in them. They have a lot of coal. They've also got a lot of minerals in them, right? And think about the ground in North Korea. There's got to be a lot of natural gas beneath the ground, right? In the shale, right? North Korea could potentially be a huge moneymaker for a lot of American billionaires. And they're saying, look, think of all the money American corporations made in China during the 1980s. Why don't we go do the same thing in North Korea? It will make loads and loads of money. And in fact, the 1990s, the U.S. economy was having a downturn. You had the first jobless recovery in the early 1990s where the economy got better, but we didn't get any jobs, and the standard of living on Main Street wasn't going up while Wall Street had a recovery, and that was weird. But, but China's opening up, and China's, huge level of foreign investment, and China loaning the USA loads of money. The U.S. economy very much benefited from China's market sector opening up. So you got a lot of capitalists in the USA that are saying, hey, let's do it in North Korea. But then you got George Soros. And if you listen to George Soros and his comments at Davos, at the World Economic Forum, listen to what he's saying, right? That as the USA was investing in China, right, the argument that was made was, okay, we're going to pour into China, we're going to invest in their market sector, and as a result, China is eventually going to become free market and capitalist, and eventually the Communist Party will fall, and that's what this will lead to. And that hasn't happened. In fact, the Communist Party of China is far stronger than it was in 1979, 1978. The opening up of China, the Deng Xiaoping reforms, made the Chinese Communist Party stronger. That's a fact, right? Now, a lot of people are going to quibble with me about that. People that are really into the Mao mythology are really going to tell me, oh, that's not true. No, actually. Read about what happened. After the death of Mao, Mao died in 1976. After Mao died, Zhou Enlai died. Zhou Enlai was someone who was on the Long March with Mao, very important figure. I'm sure I'm butchering the name. Zhou Enlai died after Mao died. And after the death of Zhou Enlai, there was a riot. It's referred to as the Tiananmen incident of 1976. There was an anti-communist riot in the capital city that went on for days, burning cars, burning Communist Party buildings, burning pictures of Mao. A lot of these intellectuals in China, after the death of Mao and after the death of Zhou Enlai, was seen as somebody who was a little more open-minded. After the death of Zhou Enlai, a lot of the professors and intellectuals and educated people in the Chinese capital city were anti-communist. They were tired of what the Gang of Four was doing. The Gang of Four was making their lives into living hell. They couldn't get anything done, right? Every 2 days, they had to have another strike to shut down the economy. Every time the economy started to move and the standard of living started to rise, they would have to have another down with campaign. And people being dragged out of their workplaces, women getting, beaten up because they wore makeup, the Red Guards raiding people's homes, the young people all getting deported to the countryside and forced to, hoe potatoes and instead of getting an education, in the universities. There was a lot of bad things that were going on in the late Cultural Revolution, right? And when Zhou Enlai died, his funeral turned into an anti-communist riot. And a lot of people that were very powerful and influential went out in the streets and burned Communist Party offices and burned cars and all of that. No one talks about this, right? But the aftermath of the death of Mao, in which the Gang of Four was in power, Mao was dead, Zhou Enlai was dead, you had an episode of anti-communist upsurges in China. And it was in the middle of that Deng Xiaoping came to power, and he switched their economy. He reformed their economy, and he did the reform and opening up, and he made very strong socialist arguments for what he did. Read the conversation he had with Robert Mugabe and the leaders of Zimbabwe about what he was doing. Deng Xiaoping was a Marxist. He was a Marxist through and through. He believed in Marxism, but he had a correct understanding. See, most of the people in the Western world, I hate to say it, who call themselves Marxists have never read this book, Capital, right? Well, Karl Marx wrote a book about what he believed. It's called Capital. And most of the people in the Western world who believe in Marxism have never read that book. In fact, most of them really believe that the idea of Marxism is to make everything fair and equal. And if we're all poor and starving, but it's equal, then that's justice, right? And Marxism is the idea that we shouldn't want money, right? We shouldn't want money in our lives. We should live frugally, and that we should, focus on love and family. That's not Marxism at all. That's Stoicism. If you read Capital, right? This is Marx's magnum opus. What Karl Marx is saying is poverty is not socialism, but to be rich is glorious. He's basically saying that capitalism, the system in which the banks, factories, and industries and major centers of economic power function in order to make profits for those who own them, cannot lead to economic prosperity because there is a gap, because it's irrational, because the capitalist is constantly trying to maximize their profits by producing as much as he can for as little of a cost. He's trying to drive the cost of production down, trying to produce as much for as little as possible, trying to increase his profit margin. And this leads to a situation where you have production not being carried out for need, but for profit, right? People talk about, there's many examples people like to give. I mean, under capitalism, people are homeless because there are too many houses. People are hungry because there's too much food. They talk about the capitalists at the restaurant. At the end of the night, they take all the excess food, they throw it in the garbage, and they dump a bunch of motor oil on it so no homeless person takes it out of the garbage. Why? Because if a homeless person can beg $2 or $3 and eat, then they make profit off of it. But if someone picks it out of the garbage, they don't make profit off of it, right? That production for profit, not for use, right? That's the problem of capitalism. And it leads to episodes of overproduction, gluts in the market, chronic poverty, mass unemployment, right? As the standard of living goes down because we produce more, right? It's a contradiction, that the more efficient production becomes, the greater poverty there is, right? And that the only way to resolve it is for the banks, factories, and industries and centers of economic power to be controlled by society. The masses of people, the proletarians, the workers, the people, society in general, must take control of the centers of economic power in order to have growth. And then once society takes control of the major centers of economic power, you can have growth that is unlimited because everybody benefits from growth. That's basically what Marx is arguing. That's what he's arguing for, is that you can have unlimited growth if you control the economy. If it's no longer irrationally run according to profits, you can have unlimited growth. You can have abundance. At no point in this book does he say it is wrong for people to have wealth. At no point in the book Capital does he say that everyone should be poor as long as it's fair. That's not what he's saying. He's saying society should control the means of production so that material living conditions can greatly advance. That's what he's arguing. He's arguing that if society controlled the means of production, if instead of the irrationality, the anarchy of production, the chaos of the market, if a planned economy existed, then we could raise people out of poverty. That's what Marx was arguing for. Deng Xiaoping understood that. Mao Zedong understood that. Read what Mao wrote, during the 1930s and 40s and 50s, he understood that. But in the final years of Mao's life, a group of people, Mao was very old and elderly, and he was living in an apartment in the Forbidden City, and the Gang of Four, led by Mao's wife, who was like a movie star, she was just this movie star, and the Gang of Four and Mao's wife and 3 other people, they took control, and they did not believe in growth. They did not believe in economic prosperity. They believed that poverty is great as long as it's equal, right? It didn't matter if China, if the people in China stayed poor. It didn't matter if most of the countryside didn't have running water and electricity. It didn't matter if they didn't have highways or high-speed trains. It didn't matter if they were behind in science. It didn't matter if people, were in the country were still even malnourished in a lot of rural areas. That didn't matter as long as it was fair. As long as it was equal, as long as they sent the young people out to the countryside and made them hoe potatoes for 10 years or something, as long as nobody wore makeup because that was capitalist celebration of the oppression of women. As long as no one had a dog or a cat because that was having a dog or a cat was bourgeois. As long as it was fair and everyone was following the party line, and there was a group of red guards that went around beating up anybody who disagreed with the party line, as long as they were forcing this Simon Pure, magical, correct party line on everybody, it didn't matter if China stayed poor. That's what the Gang of Four believed. That's not Marxism. That's utopianism, that's Stoicism, that's Jacobinism, but that's not Marxism. And Deng Xiaoping was a Marxist. And he took power. And in doing so, he actually won over a lot of those people who'd been rioting in the aftermath of the death of Zhou Enlai. A lot of those people that had been out in the streets burning cars and attacking Communist Party symbols changed their minds. Once Deng Xiaoping said to them, go open a business. We're going to control it. We're going to make sure that you follow the state central plan. Go open a business. When he opened up, his model cities in Shenzhen and elsewhere, a lot of these intellectuals, smart people, people full of creativity and brilliance, changed their minds and started supporting the Communist Party. And that's what George Soros thinks might happen in North Korea, right? If Deng Xiaoping could do it in China, Kim Jong-un can do it in North Korea, right? Kim Jong-un, if he's able to preside over a rebirth of the North Korean economy, right? If North Korea can have an economic boom of foreign investment, if the standard of living in North Korea can vastly go up, Kim Jong-un and the Korean Workers' Party will get stronger, just like the Chinese Communist Party got stronger. And that is not part of the game plan. That's not part of the game plan. Soros is the guy who did color revolutions, right? He funded, dissidents and activists and basically staged the overthrow of socialist governments all across Eastern Europe. He is the art of color revolution. He manipulates those kind of people, those artists and intellectuals and smarter people in socialist countries. He manipulates their grievances, some of which are very real. It's got to be frustrating to be, a brilliant scientist in a country that's, a country where they don't have enough money to fund your research, for example, right? It's going to be very frustrating to be, those people have some legit frustration and grievances. George Soros has mastered the art of manipulating those people's grievances, getting them to blame not global capitalism, but their government for it, getting them to be convinced that somehow if they go out and riot with CIA money, that somehow that'll lead to things getting better, and then overthrowing socialist governments. And we saw what happened in Eastern Europe in the late 80s, right? And the early 90s. Romania, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Poland, all of these countries, they had color revolutions where Soros and others funneled money to people, intellectuals, artists, and students who were frustrated with the rule of the Communist Party, were frustrated with the socialist economic model. And they went out, and Brzezinski, right? Brzezinski, actually born in Poland, was kind of the master of this. Brzezinski and Soros, they manipulated the grievances of these young people, many of which were legit, and they manipulated the grievances, and then they destroyed these countries. They cast them into huge amounts of poverty. The result was mass unemployment, mass hunger, your working class, your factory workers, your farmers generally wanted to keep socialism, but these intellectuals were manipulated. Then they had factions within the governments that were manipulated also, and they pulled off coups and they overthrew socialism. And the result is mass poverty and suffering, and Wall Street and London having a monopoly, right? Because as the economy of these countries is destroyed, who then dominates it? And they get to buy all their stuff from the West, right? In the 1990s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, about 80,000 farms in Russia went bankrupt, right? All these collective not 80,000, 80% of Russian farms went bankrupt. So who do they buy their agriculture and their food from? The United States, right? You wipe out production. All these Soviet steel mills, right? They would be bought by American steel companies and then shut down. And then they'd have to buy their steel from the United States. And they just demolished Jeffrey Sachs, Zbigniew Brzezinski, George Soros, the IMF, the World Bank. They demolished the economies of Eastern Europe and of Russia, right? And in China, that didn't happen, right? In China, the Chinese Communist Party figured out how to actually change the situation so that these intellectuals and these smart people could start startup firms and tech companies and have new ideas and open their own businesses, all being centrally controlled by the party. They have, state-controlled banks. They have state-controlled steel industry, the biggest steel industry in the world. They've got a state-controlled telecommunications manufacturer, Huawei, that makes great phones. And if I had one, my lives would be much better. They wouldn't be interrupted like this one was, right? And China figured out how to prevent basically what was happening all over the socialist world in the late 80s and 90s, in the early 90s. That's basically what happened. And so Soros is looking at the fact that North Korea might have its reform and opening up. And Jim Rogers thinks that's a great idea. He says, yep, let's invest, let's go in there. And Soros says that China is the greatest threat in the world today. He used the platform at Davos to just give an anti-Chinese tirade, to just rant and rave against China. And he doesn't want to give North Korea a Deng Xiaoping moment. He doesn't want North Korea's economy to get better. Since the 1990s, the economy of North Korea has just been devastated, right? I mean, prior to the fall of the Soviet Union, they actually had a pretty decent rate of economic growth. After the fall of the Soviet Union, especially in the 1990s when they couldn't get any oil, their economy was just a wreck, right? Their food production system came to a halt. People died of malnutrition. They call it the arduous march in North Korea. It's referred to as the arduous march, period. And now, I mean, things have gotten better. They're able to import oil now. I mean, their economy is a little bit better than it was before. But North Korea would like to have an opening up moment. And, you know, the Brzezinski, George Soros, that wing of American ruling class, of the American elite, doesn't want North Korea to have a Deng Xiaoping moment because they think that it'll make the Korean Workers' Party stronger. Whereas Jim Rogers and Mike Pompeo and a lot of the people that are grouped around Trump, they think that it would be possible. They think it would be great. They say, hey, you know, if North Korea could make lots of money, that would be great, and we could make a lot of money, and you know, the Korean Workers' Party, they get stronger, whatever, they're there, but at least they won't have a nuclear weapon, and so that'll be fine. That's a division. There is a big division among the American ruling elite when it comes to the billionaires, when it comes to North Korea. Do we want North Korea to open up and disarm? And basically, you know, if North Korea opened up, it would become very, very integrated into the economies of Russia and China, right? That's basically what would happen. And do we want North Korea to open up and integrate into the economies of Russia and China? Or do we want North Korea to stay isolated in the hopes that eventually the government will just fall? That's the division. It's a division of strategy, right? Do we want to give North Korea and the Korean Workers' Party, give them the ability to have a Deng Xiaoping moment, to adjust their socialism, to be more in line with what socialism has been like in China since the 1970s, to be in line with what socialism has been like in the Bolivarian countries? Do we want to allow them to switch and update their socialist model to work more effectively? Or do we want them to just kind of stay in a state of absolute and utter economic siege? That's really what's going on here. That's the division. So if you want to know what they disagree with when it comes to North Korea, that's what the American elite don't agree about. Wow. I'm glad that you're all joining us. So much we can talk about. Now, I know that a lot of people you know, have been raising questions. Kinky's been raising questions. Other people have been raising questions about all kinds of issues here. So I want to speak to that. A lot of different things we can talk about here. You know, interesting. I noticed in the weekend Wall Street Journal, you know, we have about the decline of Sears, right? And it's not just really about the decline of Sears. It's about the decline of the American retail sector, right? And that people just don't go shop at stores anymore. They order online. You know, that the retail sector of the U.S. economy is on its way out. It's been automated. People order stuff online, and we're seeing an end to retail. And that's quite frightening, right? I mean, that's a lot of jobs. I know that one presidential candidate who's been pretty widely ignored in the mainstream media is this guy, Andrew Yang. And his big thing is he's pushing the concept of a universal basic income. And he's basically saying that with automation, we're not going to need millions of people in the economy. So how are these people going to survive, you know, if they don't have a place in the assembly line, if they're not hiring them to work in factories, they're not hiring them to work in retail stores, what are millions of people going to do? And it's interesting because that's very similar to what I heard from Jack Ma when I was at Valdi Discussion Club in Sochi, Russia. I got to see Jack Ma's presentation. I got to be very close. I mean, it was, you know, just maybe 10, 20 feet away from Jack Ma when he spoke. You know, and Jack Ma was basically saying that, look, for years, we've been trying to make people like machines. But now, we're making machines like people. Anything that people can do, machines can do. So the only thing left for human beings is our creativity and our intelligence and our emotions and our soul. Right? And that we need to figure out how to reorient our educational system to stop trying to make people like machines and kill their human creativity so they can fit into a world that's very, you know, very authoritarian and disciplined and harsh. How can we unleash human brilliance and creativity? And how can we kind of forge a new kind of human being for a new economy where we don't need assembly line workers anymore? Very brilliant stuff. And again, it gets back to capital. It gets back to Karl Marx's Capital, where he talks about how the capitalist is always trying to drive efficiency and basically eliminate the laborer. And it gets a lot back to what Nelson Peary talks about in his beautiful book, The Future is Up to Us, how there's a new class of what he calls the precariat, of workers who never really get to work, who always kind of exist outside of the production apparatus. A lot of brilliant stuff there, but but it's all very, very important. And I think it really gets back to people don't understand what communism is about. They really don't. If you want to understand what communism is about, you really ought to read what the communists were saying in the 1930s, what William Z. Foster wrote. But there's one particular thing. If you want to look at something that's very widely available and doesn't scream communism at the top of its lungs, but gives you an insight into how communists think, find the speech that Charlie Chaplin gives at the end of his movie, The Great Dictator. Right? It's a great speech. At the end of the movie, The Great Dictator, which is a classic Hollywood movie. I don't really recommend The Great Dictator. Not my sense of humor. A lot of like physical comedy and bumbling around and silliness. And, it's 1930s, late 1930s humor. But there's this movie, The Great Dictator, that Charlie Chaplin made. And at the time that Charlie Chaplin made this movie, he was a card-carrying member of the Communist Party of the United States of America. He was a CPUSA, tried and true Communist Party member. And he made this comedy movie called The Great Dictator. And at the end of the movie, the very end of the movie, the final sequence is this 5-minute speech that moves me to tears when I see it. It's just beautiful, and it's on the internet. People call it like the greatest speech in the world. And listen to it. And doesn't scream communism, doesn't scream revolution, Marxism, but he talks about automation, and he talks about overproduction and the contradiction of human progress. He talks about machine men with machine hearts and machine mind. It's beautiful. I can't do it. I'm not Charlie Chaplin. I'm not an actor. I don't have that level of stage presence that he had. But watch Charlie Chaplin's speech at the end of The Great Dictator. If you want to know what communism is about, what real communism is about, not kids in Trotsky t-shirts, not LARPers, not people who think that money is not important and they're rebelling against their parents. You want to know what real communism is about? Real Marxism, real socialism. If you want to know what people in the developing world who are fighting to break their country out of the global financial system, if you want to know what they believe, you want to know what actual socialism is about, you want to know what Mao was fighting for with the Eighth Route Army in the mountains in the countryside of China. You want to know what the people of the Soviet Union were fighting to defend against the Nazi invaders. If you want to know what the Bolivarians are about, if you want to know what Fidel Castro is all about, you want to know what Evo Morales is all about, Hugo Chavez, watch that speech by Charlie Chaplin. That speech is the essence of what it's about. We live in a world where machines and technology are making people poorer, and humans have so much potential, but it's being held back by the irrationality of greed. And Charlie Chaplin, at the end of his speech, at the end of the movie, gives this Marxist speech, talking about how the capitalists are building dictatorships, machine men with machine hearts and machine minds. Don't give yourselves to brutes. It's beautiful stuff. Right? About how capitalism is creating greater poverty, and that's causing, the need for some kind of police state, an authoritarian militarized regime, and greater danger of war, and how in the name of democracy and people's power, we need to seize control of the economy and operate the economy rationally to serve the people and not serve greed. That's basically what he's saying. Listen to that speech. I can't do it. I'm not doing it justice. I am not doing it justice. You might see it and say, Caleb did, that was so much better than what Caleb said, because I'm not giving you the best interpretation. But watch that speech. Now, someone says, I could have sworn Chaplin was an anarchist. No, he wasn't. In fact, at his Hollywood mansion in 1932, he was a movie star. Hollywood mansion in 1932, he had campaign fundraisers for William Z. Foster. Right? William Z. Foster, the greatest American communist. He had fundraisers for him in his mansion. All the people would drive out and pay lots of money to hear William Z. Foster. That's how they raised money for their presidential campaigns. And in the 1950s, during McCarthyism, Charlie Chaplin was deported. Bet you didn't know that. He was kicked out of the country for being a communist, right? Other people in Hollywood, they just got blacklisted. Charlie Chaplin, they took his U.S. residency away. Born in Britain, they deported him. He ended up living in Ireland for most of his life. And there's statues of him in Ireland. He's very, very loved. And that's Charlie Chaplin. Read about Charlie Chaplin. Very, very interesting fellow. But that, and I wanted to also mention, 1999, that's 20 years ago. That was the Columbine Massacre, the first major mass shooting of our age. Now mass shootings are a dime a dozen. They grow on trees practically. But a lot of people don't realize at the same time that brutal, horrendous shooting happened on April 20th, 1999, the United States was bombing Serbia, right? Starting, the anniversary will be March 24th. It's coming up, about a week from today. March 24th was the anniversary of when Bill Clinton unleashed a bombing campaign against Serbia and against Yugoslavia, right? And it was done in the name of human rights. And that was really the basis. I mean, that was Samantha Power. Samantha Power, a very, very, I guess I can editorialize here, a very, very evil woman named Samantha Power, a warmonger. And I mean that literally, right? Fishmongers sell fish, warmongers sell war. And Samantha Power, right, with her problem from hell, the woman who calls herself the genocide chick, I've been close to her at the UN. I was at her press briefings. Samantha Power is an evil woman. She is a war salesperson. She sells war for a living. And they sold war based on a lie in 1999, right? They basically played up this idea that Muslims were being persecuted by the Serbian government, right? A lot of what they said was completely discredited. You have the UN bodies coming out now and saying, yeah, they weren't committing genocide. That photograph, the famous photograph of the really skinny guy behind a fence that everyone says was the Holocaust, we now find out that was staged. The skinny Kosovoan guy had a disease. He wasn't starving, and he wasn't behind a fence. It was like there was just a fence that happened to be there. A whole lot of lies. Michael Parenti did a great job exposing it. The USA, Saudi Arabia, CIA were funding the Kosovo Liberation Army, which was jihadists, Wahhabis, right? Sunni, Wahhabi extremists, terrorists, fighting against the secular socialist government of Yugoslavia, against Slobodan Milosevic and Serbia. And based on that, Bill Clinton announced, and with the help of Samantha Power, they had a responsibility to protect, right? They just want to help those poor, innocent people. The Pentagon is just a rescue mission. It's a cowboy. It's going to go in there and save the day. Poor people were being oppressed, and so the USA went in there and bombed and destroyed so many innocent people's lives. Bombed and destroyed. They bombed power plants. They bombed hospitals. They bombed the Chinese embassy and killed embassy workers. They destroyed some historic churches, some of the most beautiful ancient Orthodox churches, some of the oldest churches in the history of the Christian religion were bombed and destroyed, in the aftermath. And Bill Clinton was in there. And yes, at the time that the brutal Columbine Massacre was happening, Bill Clinton was conducting a bombing campaign and killing civilians in Yugoslavia. It was a crime. And this is going to be 20 years since the destruction of Serbia. Michael Parenti has written about it. A lot of really good scholarship has come out. And it was a lie. And Samantha Power and a lot of these professional warmongers, they basically, it's really the model for what they did in Syria, what they did in Libya, where they fund jihadists and extremists. They tell the Western world it's a struggle for democracy against dictatorship. They don't mention that these terrorists and extremists are actually fighting for, a Wahhabi government. They want to build a new Saudi Arabia. They're not fighting for freedom. They make it a dictator versus democracy in the Western world. They take a bunch of photos that are not exactly representing what's happening, a bunch of heart-wrenching photos, and they say, oh, humanitarian intervention, we got to go in, and they bomb and destroy a country. And the standard of living drops, and Wall Street and London absorb and demolish the economy of a country. And that's what happened in Serbia, right? The destruction of Serbia, the destruction of Yugoslavia, that was really, really horrendous. And now we know, the facts have come out, commissions have confirmed that a lot of what we were being told. Were there atrocities being committed in the civil war between the U.S.-funded Kosovo Liberation Army and the Serbian government? Sure, there were atrocities. There were bad things that were done on both sides. There were a lot of horrendous things that the Kosovo Liberation Army was doing. But regardless, right, a lot of what we were being told was propaganda. It was false, right? That there was not genocide going on. Even the UN confirms now genocide was not happening. So we now know that responsibility to protect is a lie. And I often have made this point, and I want to make it once again, when it comes to Serbia and when it comes to responsibility to protect. And this shows how evil these folks are. And it really makes you put the Ayn Rand stuff in perspective, because basically the reason that Samantha Power and responsibility to protect and the genocide chick and human rights and Coney 2012, the reason that stuff works, the reason it works is because human beings are good. People are good deep down. When people hear about people on the other side of the world who are dying and being killed and starving, they want to help them, right? It's just basic. People have compassion in their hearts. People are not completely selfish. They're not lacking in empathy. People have a natural desire to help other people who are suffering. And unfortunately, the most evil people in the world, I mean, the rulers, the overlords of Western capitalism, have figured out how to manipulate some of the best aspects of human being. Basic human solidarity, compassion. They don't have it themselves. They clearly don't have it themselves. Right? They don't feel empathy for all the people that they kill. They don't have compassion. They believe in Ayn Rand and free markets and all of that. But they've figured out how to manipulate the basic feelings of human solidarity that exist in us, right? And so they figured out how to stage photographs in Syria or Libya or Iraq or Serbia, stage a bunch of photographs, overload us with propaganda, pluck our heartstrings, manipulate our desire to help other people who are suffering in order to get us to support even more suffering, right? I mean, you can go down the line. In none of these places has people's lives gotten better. Did people's lives get better in Serbia? Did people's lives get better in Libya? Did people's lives get better in Syria, since we've been trying to, and fomenting civil war there? Have people's lives gotten better in Iraq? I mean, 16, 17 years in Afghanistan. Have people's lives gotten any better, right? People's lives haven't gotten any better. Every one of these situations, even if everything they said against these governments was true, even if every single one of the allegations, even if every single one of the allegations they made against Saddam Hussein or Bashar al-Assad or Gaddafi, even if every single thing they said about them was true, things have objectively gotten worse, right? Things are so bad in Libya today, people are getting on rafts and dying in the Mediterranean trying to get out. I mean, all of that stuff we've been hearing about Cuba, right? For years they say, oh, look, there's somebody on a raft from Cuba. That proves that Cuba's a hellhole. Well, every day people are trying to get out of Libya on rafts because of what Western capitalism has imposed on the country, right? Iraq, refugee crisis, ISIS, Syria. Afghanistan is now the heroin capital of the world. It's opium poppy fields and the Taliban and ISIS and Al-Qaeda. I mean, nobody in their right mind would say that any of these countries have gotten better. So all the people in those images that they were plucking our heartstrings with are worse off than they were before. They have manipulated these basic feelings of human solidarity. They have found the good within us and manipulated it to serve evil. It's scary. It's very, very, very scary. It's very, very, very scary. And that's why I think a lot of people, unfortunately, you get these mass shootings. And you get these people who basically have learned to reject that part of themselves. They see that the compassion, the kindness within them has been manipulated. They feel like they've been taken advantage of, and so they learn to reject it. They reject the kindness and compassion within themselves. It's very scary. The psychopathic mindset that is promoted in Atlas Shrugged and, The Fountainhead, which is a novel where the hero is a rapist and the rape is portrayed as heroic. The Ayn Rand mindset, no compassion for anyone, focus purely on your own gain, the virtue of selfishness, right? That mindset, when you manipulate what's good that people have, when you cynically lie in order to manipulate people's basic human feelings of kindness and solidarity, you're going to get people starting to reject those feelings. And they're going to reject that part of themselves. And they're going to take on the attribute of the people manipulating them. And they're going to become cynical. I mean, it's the Washington, D.C. culture. If you believe in right and wrong, you're a Boy Scout. Right? If you believe that the rule of law applies, you're a Boy Scout. You're just, the cynicism of the Western leaders trickles into the population. I think that's largely happening in the world we live in. But anyway, what else is going on in people's minds? I see people arguing about Yugoslavia. People asking me what's the most promising Democratic Party candidate. Not for me to say. I'm not the person to ask about that. I just try to report on things. Shonen Ronan says Three Nation, and I think Shonen Ronan said she was from Ohio, so shout out to you. Ohio's a beautiful state. I'm from there as well. A lot easier to breathe in Ohio, a lot less air pollution, I'll tell you that much. Someone wants me to talk about Sudan. Someone wants me to talk about Irish socialist history. Oh, a lot of things on people's minds. Today is St. Patrick's Day, isn't it, right? I bet you didn't know that St. Patrick himself was not Irish. He was a North African, right? He was a Moorish person who brought Christianity to Ireland. Happy St. Patrick's Day to everybody. Did you know that Ireland was first recognized by Soviet Russia, says Ronnie Miller? I did not know that. Have you heard of the technocracy movement during the Great Depression? I have, and I wish there was more written about it. I know it was something that the communists at the time polemicized against quite a bit and wrote a lot about it. And I'd like to learn more about it, because I feel like some of the arguments we're hearing from the Silicon Valley folks might be similar to it, but I don't quite know, for example. What else is going on? So a lot of people's views here. Lenin met Connolly. Well, that I did know. James Connolly, who was the ideological father of the Irish liberation movement, the socialist, the leader of the post office revolt, the 1916 Easter uprising, and his writings on the national question and why Marxists should support nationalism of the oppressed. That was very key. Happy St. Patrick's Day. Now, Kazuya is saying Venezuela, and yes, I understand there was a big demonstration yesterday in Washington, D.C. to support Venezuela, and that's great. I'm glad people are out there, because Venezuela, what they're doing to that country, you turn off a country's power and you say, oh, look, socialism, they don't have power. I mean, the hypocrisy is rather extreme, right? Puerto Rico didn't have power for over a year. Capitalist Puerto Rico, that's part of the United States of America, the richest country in the world, did not have electricity for over a year. And no one said, oh, capitalism can't bring power to people in electricity. I mean, it's come on, right? I talked to people in neighborhoods in Caracas where they didn't have power for weeks. For whole weeks, the power would just go off under neoliberalism in the 1990s and the IMF. There are parts of the developing world, you go to Central America, you go to the jungles of Guatemala and Honduras, where people have never had electricity. They don't even have the ability to speak Spanish. They've never been taught literacy. Come on, folks. Come on, right? This idea, electricity went out in Venezuela, probably because the CIA forces sabotaged it. Oh, but that proves that socialism is bad. It's such a selective memory these people have. They really are selective. I'll mention this. Jordan Peterson is very popular on the internet these days. And the YouTube algorithms really love Jordan Peterson. You watch one of his videos, and then for the next 2 weeks, every time your suggested video feed comes up, you're watching Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson tweets out that, oh, look, China, when it became capitalist, their economy boomed. How is China capitalist, right? The same people that want to tell you that you can't have Obamacare, can't have free healthcare because that's socialism, right? Or that if you raise taxes on the rich, we're becoming a communist country. Then they look at China with its huge state-run banks, its huge state-run industries, its 5-year economic plan, its ruling communist party, and then they say, oh, it's capitalist, that's why they're successful. How do they lie like this, right? They're constantly opposing the slightest progressive reform in the Western world because that's communism. But then they look at China with a huge state-run economy, the government controlling the means of production, 5-year economic plans, an ideological Marxist-Leninist party, a country that executes billionaires, and they say, oh, it's capitalist. Oh, that's why it's good. It's capitalist. Right? So China can have a state-run government economy, and they say it's capitalist. But then all of we can't have Obamacare in the USA, or, we can't raise taxes on the rich. We can't give people college because then we'll be communist. Look what happened with Pol Pot. These people are selective. It's one thing, there's people that are like ideological and they want to denounce China and they say it's not true socialism. That's one thing. But for these libertarian types to say that China is capitalist, when the amount of state and government control there is massive and it's led to huge economic successes, is just the height of dishonesty. These people don't care about what the truth is. They really, really don't, right? China, capitalist, right? China is somehow capitalist, according to them. So therefore, all of its successes don't count. And meanwhile, the Soviet Union, well, it collapsed. So everything that happened before the collapse, like defeating the Nazis, like being the first country in outer space, like inventing the AK-47 rifle, like industrializing the whole country, bringing electricity, wiping out illiteracy, inventing cellular phones, inventing LED lights. Oh, none of that counts. None of that counts because they collapsed, right? Oh, China, well, they're capitalist. How are they capitalist? The government runs everything. I mean, the government has absolute control over the economy. Oh, but they're capitalist. But the USA, oh, you know why we're having problems? We're communist, right? We have a post office. We must be communist. These people are selective. They are completely selective and dishonest. I mean, they really have no shred of honesty with them, right? I mean, it drives me up the wall, and the funny thing, Jordan Peterson fans, I'll throw this out there. Jordan Peterson, the thing about him is that, if you meet a Peterson fan, they are in love with him, right? He's psychologically messing with them, right? He's their father. He's the father figure that they long for. So if you disagree with anything he says, they get this desperate, angry. It's weird. I made 2 videos on Jordan Peterson. Might make another one. They get a lot of views because he's got a lot of fans, but the comments, you should read the comments from these people. I mean, it's like they're not even responding to anything I said, but it's like, how dare you insult Jordan Peterson? He gave me self-help. He turned my life around, you big meanie. It's weird, all right? And maybe Jordan Peterson's self-help has helped a lot of people. I think his psychological beliefs or whatever, and some of it I strongly disagree with it, but some of it, whatever, clean your room. I think that's good advice, right? The more clean you are, the more organized your life is, the better you can be, right? And that, that's why it's really important to, maintain a regular sleep schedule, stuff like that. Some of it's kind of basic psychology, and it's good stuff. One thing I will say about Jordan Peterson is part of his secret to his success is that Canadian accent he's got. Well, I think you ought to clean your room, and I'm not politically correct here, and he's got this gentleness in his voice. And I think that if he were to say what he said in kind of an angry way, or if his voice was a little bit deeper, he spoke, people would be scared shitless, and they wouldn't listen to him. That a lot of what he says is stuff that people really don't want to hear, but he gets away with saying it by, what is it? They're narcissists, and they're just critical, and that's Jordan Peterson. I think it's very interesting that a lot of times it's not what you say, but it's how you say it. And Jordan Peterson is a great expression of that. If he said what he said in an angrier voice, people wouldn't give him the time of day. I can guarantee you that. But what else is on people's minds? I've got a lot to talk about. A lot going on in this world. Don't worry, I have another glass. I'm totally addicted to this diet beverage. I will say that. And that's why I don't touch Red Bull, right? I got friends, shout out to a certain friend who loves Red Bull. That's okay with you. But I know how addicted I am to the caffeine and diet soda. And that's why, any upper I stay away from, right? Anything that might anything that would render this ineffective, right? Would be very, very dangerous for my health. This isn't good. I always try to drink a lot of water, because I know that Diet Coke is not the best thing, oh, did I just say it? I think I just said it. Oh my God. You owe me money. No, I'm just kidding. But in all honesty, though, it's, soda is not the best thing for you. But there's a lot of other things out there that are really not good for you. Owen Stevens says, Caleb is a capitalist, confirmed. Well, I don't own any means of production. I don't. Would that be wrong? Not necessarily, right? Jack Ma, he owns a very big company, but he's helping people in China to raise their standard of living. But no, at this point, I don't own any centers of economic power, right? To be a capitalist is to have capital, to own means of production. I don't own any factories. I don't own any, apartment buildings. I don't own any capital, so I'm not a capitalist. And I don't advocate a capitalist system. I advocate an economy controlled by the people and organized to serve society. So I don't think I'm a capitalist, but whatever, there's a lot of different definitions of the term. I actually recently watched this clip of Ben Shapiro arguing, and I must say, the best friend that these free market folks ever had is that's not real socialism crowd. Seriously, right? Ben Shapiro and all them get up there. Socialism has killed a gamillion people. It's killed a million people. Everywhere it's ever been tried. It's always led to people just being poorer everywhere. And someone gets up, that's all true, but it's just not real socialism. There's worker cooperatives. It's like, shut up. Just shut up. Seriously. It's like, at that point, you might as well just give up. And I'll say this. I've said this before. If everywhere that socialism had ever been implemented as an economic system, all that ever happened was people getting poorer. If all that ever happened under socialism was the standard of living going down, brutal dictatorship and millions of people dying, and there were no economic gains from it, if that were true, Ben Shapiro would be right. And so would Jordan Peterson, and so would all of the stupid anti-communists on the internet. If that were true, if what they were saying was true, I would stop believing in Marxism. It's not true, right? And the thing is, the entire debate is premised around that being true. And yes, if you think that all that ever happened following the 1917 revolution in Russia is people were poor and starving and miserable and dying and nothing good happened, if you think that all that's happened in China since 1949 is people being oppressed and brutally tortured and killed and starving and everyone's just gotten poorer, if you think that and you still believe in socialism, there is something wrong with you. I will be honest, because you don't make any sense, right? Socialist revolutions have happened all over the world, and there have been bad things, and most of the time they've adopted a very, very authoritarian government, and that's obviously not desirable. It was created out of necessity, most likely, because they were in a state of civil war and underdevelopment. But if it were true that all that had ever happened in Cuba since 1959, if all that ever happened in Venezuela and Bolivia and Nicaragua during the Bolivarian years, if all that ever happened in these countries where people were starving and miserable, if there was no economic gain whatsoever, they would be right. We should stop. Then we should quit, right? But that isn't true. Who invented LED lights? Who invented space travel? Who invented cellular phones? Right? How was it that Russia became a booming industrial center? Who was producing more steel than any other country in the world during the Great Depression? Who built the world's largest hydroelectrical facility, the Dnieper Dam, right? What's the largest hydroelectrical power plant in the world today, right? It is the Three Gorges Dam in China, right? Why is it that China is no longer the sick man of Asia, but is the second largest economy on Earth? Why is it why is it that you have electricity all over the former USSR? It's fully electrified, you know? Why is it that you didn't have illiteracy in the Soviet Union? You know, why is it that you have so many universities, right? I mean, come on, people, right? You can criticize these countries. Awful things happened, mistakes were made. But to say that it was just a huge economic failure, no gains ever happened, it just failed, is a big, fat lie. Right? It's just a big, fat lie. It is. And if you accept that, stop being a socialist. If you believe that, that what I just said about LED lights is the equivalent of Holocaust denial, that's just a big fat lie. No, the Soviet Union could never invent anything. They didn't go to outer space. They didn't defeat the Nazis. They didn't drastically increase the standard of living. You know, China, you know, if you believe that everything I just said is a lie, stop believing in socialism. Please, I'm begging you, just stop believing in socialism. Because every time you get up there, and every time some little guy gets up there, well, everything you said about socialism is true, you know, it's true, but what if we start a worker cooperative? Shut up, please. And I'm for worker cooperatives. I'm not against worker cooperatives. I'm really not. I think worker cooperatives are great, you know, and actually I think worker cooperatives, part of the reason that they're a great idea is because every worker has a real incentive to make the company function, because the better the company does, the more they get paid in a worker cooperative. And actually, right, if you're a worker, you're alienated from your labor. Right? I mean, you just want to clock in and clock out. You don't care about what goes on at your job, right? Your boss man, he got so many hours from you, you're out of there. You don't care how much money they make. You just want to get by. Well, on a worker cooperative, where you have a real incentive for the profits of the company increasing, it's actually very successful. I think that's a good thing. Worker cooperatives are good, but worker cooperatives are not the definition of socialism. They exist in socialist countries, and they should. I mean, the collective farms of the USSR, what were they? They were farms. They sold agricultural produce to the state. They were collective. The farmers collectively owned it and sold their goods to the state. Worker co-ops are good things, but they still function according to the market. And in a capitalist economy, a worker co-op could compete with other worker co-ops, right? Because it's trying to make a profit. And say you have a worker co-op and you're making pottery, and there's another guy and he has another, you know, he's making his pottery. You're going to try to outdo him and put him out of business. You need a state central plan. Worker cooperatives are good. I am not opposed to worker cooperatives, but you need a state central plan, right? You need an overall planned economy that is not functioning according to profits. Power plants should not be run for profit. Healthcare should not be run for profit. Banking and the lending of money and credit should not be done for profit. Industries, steel manufacturing, coal mining, any major economic entity should be operated according to central planning and societal good. Other things, sure, I think that, having, for example, the government run restaurants is pretty dumb, right? And you shouldn't have state-run restaurants. Consumer goods, right? Cell phones. If you want to build a kind of state-controlled corporation like Huawei or ZTE to make cell phones and consumer goods, good, right? That some things, sure, there's a role for the market. Worker cooperatives are better because then every employee has a motivation to do their best and to raise the productivity. Worker cooperatives, I think, are better than private enterprise, but private enterprise has its role too. Why should the Soviet model of doing things, it was necessary, and it had its role. It raised standard of livings, but also ultimately it comes into a rut. You need to have a market sector in socialist society. You need to let people go out and start their own businesses. You need to do that, but you need the major centers of economic power, the commanding heights, to be controlled by the people. And worker cooperatives should be encouraged, right? But ultimately, yes, you need some level of a private sector. But the economy, the means of production, should ultimately be forced to function for the good of the public. And even those private companies should be under the grip of the state. The state should be controlling them and forcing them to do what's in the interest of society. They shouldn't be allowed to go against the interests of society. They should be controlled. They should be taxed. But you need a private sector on some level or other, right? If not, you end up with what they had in China, with what they had in Eastern Europe, of a layer of people that are smart and creative and feel like they're being crushed and feel like their potential is being held back. And they get angry and they get angsty, and then they become a base of counter-revolution. Right? That's basically what happened in the Cold War. Zbigniew Brzezinski and George Soros figured out how to manipulate people who felt trapped in an economy where everything was run by the government. Right? That's the reality. Sometimes you have to have some layer of a middle class that's controlled. It's controlled by the state, but you gotta let people start their own company. You gotta let people have tech startup firms. And in fact, one of the brilliant things, if you look at socialism in Nicaragua under the Sandinistas, is they've actually allowed, with their micro-entrepreneurship, they've helped a lot of people to start their own businesses. Socialism has enabled people to become capitalists, right? But they're becoming capitalists in a way that they have a good relationship with the state, and ultimately the state can dictate what they do, and so the economy is not irrationally operating according to profits, right? That's the socialism of the 21st century. It is society controlling the means of production and allowing people to unleash their creativity and their brilliance. A market sector that serves society and is forced to serve society in line with the state. Now, someone's telling me they made a meme of Caleb. Well, hey, I like to be memed. I've been memed before. But hey, if you want to post your meme out there, I love memes. They're fun. Memes are fun. They're fun things. I enjoy memes. Meme culture is an interesting, fun thing out there. I'm going to have some water now. We've talked about a lot of things here, but I love you all, right? Now, someone's saying you're an economic fascist. No, I don't think I'm an economic fascist. Fascism is Bonapartism. And I've talked about that before. And if you want to study, look at the economics of fascism. The fascists, they find a constituency, and then they beat among one section of the working class. They whipsaw the working class. They play them against each other. They beat down one section on behalf of another section. They drive one section of society into greater poverty while they build up another section. And you want to know what fascism is? The basis of fascism is this. The pie is only this big. That's the basis of fascism. When the pie is only this big, suddenly we're not fighting about growth. We're not unleashing human creativity. Suddenly, it's just who deserves a bigger slice. And one section says, well, I deserve the bigger slice. The other section says, no, I deserve the bigger slice. Another section says, I deserve the bigger slice. That's the basis of fascism. Whenever you say that the pie is only this big and it can't grow, the pie can't expand, the pie can't get bigger, there's no human progress, it's all just a struggle over what we already have and chopping it up into redistributing. When you get into that mindset, that's the basis of fascism. Right? The pie is only so big, so who decides who gets what? And then, of course, people are going to be divided. People are going to say, my neighborhood, my ethnic background, my race should get the bigger slice of the pie. And then somebody else is going to say, well, my race, my ethnic background should get a bigger slice of the pie. And then you get the government, you get a Bonapartist wing of the government, mobilizes one section and says, yeah, I think you should get the piece of the pie. Now go out and beat the crap out of and murder and kill this other section and just take every piece of pie they got and I'll give it to you. That's fascism. That's fascist economics, right? That's the Park Chung-hee regime in South Korea. That's Hitler in Nazi Germany. That is the essence of fascism. Fascism is when the pie is only this big, so one section of society is mobilized to take everything from another section, and that's fascism. It is the extreme Bonapartism. It is reactionary Bonapartism, whipsawing the working class and rejecting historical progress. That is the basis of fascism. That is the economics of what went on in Nazi Germany, of what went on in fascist Italy, of what went on in Park Chung-hee's regime in South Korea. That's fascism. I reject fascism. However, I'm not into the whole punch a Nazi thing. I think that at this point, fascism is largely an intellectual danger, right? What you might call white nationalism, that kind of thing, it's an intellectual threat. And we need to argue with these people and refute their ideas. And one of my biggest pet peeves on the left is anti-intellectualism. And I got to tell you, I was in a group, and it was beyond me, right? People would come up to us and say, communism killed 1 million gajillion people. And I would argue against them. They'd say, don't do that. Only white people care about that. It was like this weird, if you actually engage in intellectual ideas, you're a racist, autistic white male. Right? All right? And that learning facts and making logical arguments, that's not real activism. Real activists just march around with signs around whatever MSNBC's talking about, Caleb. We don't know stuff. We don't read books. You're a nerd. It's that kind of atmosphere that exists in a lot of left circles. That's why they're all just becoming liberals at this point. Because why do they need books? Why do they need ideology? Why do they need facts? They don't need any of that, right? Whatever the liberals are talking about, we march around in a circle with a bunch of signs. We actually do something. Oh boy, am I going to have to tell my joke again? I'm going to have to tell the joke again. My trademark joke. I love this joke. Hate me for it. I'll try to tell it without naming names. I think you'll know who I'm talking about. The joke is that a communist, right? Or, no. The joke is that there's a lawyer. And he has a dream. And he dreams, in his dream, the voice of God says to him, you must hire a communist to work at your law firm. He says, okay. So he wakes up and he says, all right, I'm going to hire a communist to work at my law firm. So he gets out his phone book or he gets on Google. He finds a communist organization, calls them up, says, I want to hire one of you to work at my law firm. They say, okay. He hires somebody from that particular organization. And so he hires this young person from a communist organization, and he takes them into the back of his law office and he says, all right, I'm hiring you because you're a communist. I had a dream that I have to hire a communist. And so what I want is for you to file these papers. All right? There you go. So, goes away, comes back at the end of the day, and the papers are not filed. And he says to this young person from a communist organization, he says, why didn't you file the papers? And this young person says, now is not the time to be talking about filing the papers. We've got to defeat the ultra-right, Donald Trump. He's out of control. We got to take back the Senate, defeat the Republicans, and maybe then down the road, then we can file the papers. And he's like, are you kidding me? He's like, you're fired. Get out of here. So he thinks, okay, that communist group, they might not be the right one. I'm going to hire another communist group. So hires some other communist group. He says to them, all right, these are the papers. I'm hiring you because you're a communist. File the papers. So sends the person to file the papers, comes back at the end of the day, comes in. They're not there, and neither are the papers. And he's like, where did they go? What happened? He finds them out on the street trying to sell the papers to people. Here, for $1, you can get a copy. He's like, I told you to file the papers, not sell the papers. File the papers. He's like, you're fired. This is crazy. And so he finds another person from another communist group, and he says, okay. He says, I don't know what it was about the other two communist groups, but you look a little more serious. Why don't you file the papers, right? So he takes them, shows them the papers. They start filing the papers, right? Right? He comes back. They're gone. All the papers are unfiled. The person's gone. And he's like, oh no. But then he sees a leaflet that's been left in the room where the papers are. And it says, rally downtown for filing the papers. And he's like, oh dear, this is me. So he goes to downtown, to Times Square, and he sees a big cage set up, you know, with you know, fences and a bunch of police standing around, and there's a big rally going on with people with signs that all look exactly the same, and they're chanting, "File the papers! File the papers!" And then they got a speaker up there who's Palestinian, and they say, "The fight to file the papers is the fight for Palestine," and everyone goes, "Yay!" And they got a transgender person, they get up there, "The fight of the transgendered people is the fight to file the papers, yay!" And he sees this communist he hired, and he goes up and he says, "What are you doing? I didn't ask you to lobby and work for the Democrats to defeat Trump. I asked you to file the papers. I didn't ask you to sell the papers on the street. I asked you to file the papers. And now, I didn't ask you to have a big rally in Times Square. I asked you to file the papers." And the person looks at it and he says, "How dare you compare me to those other communist groups? They just talk. They just talk about filing the papers. We're the ones who actually did something." So there you go. That's my joke. Maybe you don't appreciate that. Maybe you don't get it. But that's kind of the reality, is that there's this atmosphere in lefty circles where it's like you can't actually organize people. You can't actually convince people of socialist ideas. You got to do something else, whether it's, you know, it's supporting the Democrats or having little rallies around whatever the Democratic Party, liberals' latest liberal cause is. It's weird. It's very, very weird. And you know, there's this feeling, you know, it's like the right wing, you know, Ben Shapiro and all of them have this whole thing about facts don't care about your feelings, right? We know facts. Well, you know, leftists know facts also. But in left-wing circles, if you act like you know facts, then it's like, how dare you know facts? It's like you're just supposed to be in this emotional person who's upset about oppression. And if you know facts, and if you can make logical arguments against the right wing, if you can engage them, if you can debate them, if you can refute their ideas, you're a bad person. You're just as bad as they are. I debated Augustus Sol Invictus. I couldn't disagree more with that man. But the fact that I debated him and I refuted his ideas, I didn't just scream and yell at him and punch him like Antifa, is supposed to be some big moral flaw in my character, right? That's how crazy these people are. And that's why basic, you know, leftist concepts have been lost, right? Leftism has become, it's about hating the right wing. It's about being like the Democrats, but being over the top and emotional about it. And that's been lost. You know, Kinky says my debate with Invictus was epic. Well, thank you. Julian Assange also thought my debate with Invictus was epic. A lot of people saw that debate and said it was good. And in fact, technical difficulties. I'm back. But hey, this might be a sign that it's time to wrap up anyway. But I'm just opposed to that atmosphere in left-wing circles that does not tolerate debate. And it's like it's like the right wing has this, well, facts don't care about your feelings. And leftists are like, my feelings don't care about your facts. You know, if you know facts, you're a racist, and only nerds know facts. And we protest, and we just march around in circles, and we watch Rachel Maddow, and we do whatever Democrats do, and Marxism, schmarxism, and, you know, that's the atmosphere. That's what a lot of people that occupy so-called communist groups believe. And unfortunately, I think that's why a lot of young guys that are into history and politics and all that are not interested in the left. They see the left as just a group of people that scream and yell, and a mob of people that are emotional and don't care about history and theory. And that's a big problem. But, you know, I'm bitter. I should not be bitter. One thing I will say, folks, before I go is, you know, I wrote a book. About a year ago, I came out with this book, Getting Rich Without Capitalism. And if you want to know, you know, I continue to get beautiful feedback on this book. People email me all the time saying, we love it. We love this book. You know, the viewpoint that you put forward. In fact, somebody emailed me the other day and said, what you wrote in here about Nord Stream 2 and oil and the gas industry is more true today than when you wrote it, right? I mean, people see the perspective that I put forward in this book. They like it. And if you haven't gotten yourself a copy of Getting Rich Without Capitalism, you ought to get one. Because what I put forward in this book is not the standard kind of thinking you get in left-wing circles. It's a very, very different brand, but it's something that people will definitely need. It's the kind of thing we talk about on these lives. It's a very different way of understanding things, but it's popular. There you go. So if you want to get yourself a copy, I recommend it, right? You know, I mean, it's gotten a lot of good reviews, Fort Russ blog and others, so get yourself one, Amazon.com, you know, it's a popular book. I recommend it. And I'm not going to say too much about it now, but I will be coming out with a new book soon, a new one, so keep your eyes out. Not saying too much about it. Big surprise, but there is a new book in the works. hold your horses. New book in the works. Exciting times we live in. New book being published. Fingers crossed, right? So exciting times. Keep your eyes out. It'll be fun. But I love you all. And the other thing is Nowruz, the Persian New Year's festival, is approaching, right? And that's a holiday. It's celebrated in India. It's celebrated in Central Asia. It's celebrated in Iran. It's celebrated in a lot of places. Not a Muslim holiday. It's just a Persian cultural holiday, the Nowruz, the New Year. And that's approaching. And, you know, I mean, it's springtime, right? I mean, it's a beautiful, beautiful weather out there in New York City, kind of a warm day. And, you know, I want to let you all know that we're in a crossroads. I mean, I titled this blog, Turning Point in America, or Critical Moment in America, America to Crossroads. And, you know, we're approaching a new time, and new ideas are coming forward, and old ideas are fading away. The world is changing. And as much as we want to be pessimistic, and we look at these horrendous shootings that happen and all of that, there's reason for hope. There really is. There's a lot to be optimistic and hopeful about in our world today. A lot of hardship, a lot of sad things are out there, but we've got to be optimistic. If we don't have optimism, if we don't keep a good attitude, if we don't keep looking to the future, we can't keep going. The world is difficult, and I love you all. And I say that from the bottom of my heart, right? I divide you into 3 categories. We got our fans, right? Fans who love it, who've been, you know. We got our haters, people that are on here and say that I'm a liar and a fascist and a big phony and all that. Hey, I love you too, don't worry. And we got lurkers, right? And there's a lot of you talking right now. I'm not seeing your comments. You're not leaving comments. You're not leaving comments. I have an idea who some of you might be, but I'm not going to say. But regardless, so we got our fans, we got our haters and our lurkers. I love you all. You're all a vital, important part of this conversation, right? And even if you don't agree with what I'm saying here, you like what is being said here. You know that what I'm saying on here is very, very unique, right? I'm saying stuff that typical socialists don't say. I'm not sitting here, I'm not a young guy with a big microphone sitting there cursing about how corporations have too much power and we need free health care. I'm not sitting here calling people racist, sexist, and homophobic and telling you what celebrity said what and did what offensive thing or cultural appropriation this week, right? That's your typical left. I'm also not right-wing. I'm not sitting here, you know, talking about how Muslims are all going to kill us all and white nationalism, all that kind of shit. I'm not talking that way either. I'm offering you a unique brand. I am offering you a unique brand. This is something you don't find anywhere else, but this is something the world desperately needs, okay? And I'm not saying that because it's me, right? We all think we're all special. It's not about me, right? The ideas that I'm putting out here are uniquely special. No one else talks this way. Not in the United States, at least. In the developing world, the ideas that I espouse are quite common. I learned that when I went to Ecuador in 2013. The way communists talk in the developing world, the way, you know, people who believe in socialism and communism talk in, you know, Latin America, India, Pakistan, you know, China, you know, Vietnam, places like that, is a lot like what I talk. I mean, the way I talk seems like common sense. A lot of what I'm saying on here seems like common sense to people in the developing world. But in the Western world, unfortunately, it is what it is. We don't have this kind of discourse. We have stoicism and hedonism, right-wing hedonism that says, I don't want to pay taxes. I just live for myself. I'm selfish. Left-wing stoicism, it says there's more to life than money. Why don't we enjoy poverty? It's natural and beautiful. No, I am putting forward a line of march, right? I am saying that we need to raise living standards and we need an overall economic vision for the rebirth of the United States. We need an economy that helps other countries, win-win cooperation. We need central planning. We need scientific progress. We need the economic rebirth of the country. That's what I'm saying, right? I'm not giving you typical right-wing hedonism that, you know, who cares about anyone else? Just live for yourself, man. I'm not giving you left-wing stoicism and worship of poverty and spiritualism and resentment and pessimism. I am giving you a unique brand. I am offering you something that you're not finding anywhere else in the United States. And it's not, you know, I'm not saying I'm some brilliant or original guy. This is kind of common sense around the world. People want their living standards to go up. They don't trust, you know, the chaos of the market to do it for them. It's kind of common sense elsewhere, but I'm giving it to you here and no one else is saying it. So this is what I'm saying, right? You know, there you go. So that's what I'm offering to you. So make this bigger. Be part of this conversation. I love you all deeply. I'm glad you all have enjoyed this. It's been a great conversation. Happy weekend. Happy St. Patrick's Day. God bless you all.